Hey everybody, Ron here. I promised that I would do a video on why I like old school gaming, and this is this. I'm going to give you a few reasons why, but first I just want to talk about my experience with the old school Renaissance. I was aware of the old school Renaissance since the beginning of the old school Renaissance. I started playing when the game was that, at least late first edition. Of course, the game was starting to change by then, but still the games that I learned on, like Basic, had that old school dungeon crawl style game in it. So that's what I first came across when I entered the hobby. I remember going to different events, here in the early 2000s and seeing a group playing first edition while I think I was playing 3.5 or fourth edition at that time. And just kind of like, at least internally, turning my nose up at it. What are these people doing? Why are they playing that old game? That was my attitude then. So I was very firmly in the modern D&D camp. Let's play 3rd edition, 3.5. Let's do that. Played 4th edition when it was released. Got burned out on that actually, but that's where I was back then. And I knew about the old school revival. I knew that people were playing games that emulated that style, starting with Osric and Labyrinth Lord and all that kind of stuff. I knew about those games. It was probably when I heard about Old School Essentials, which was just kind of a clean up, updated version of BX Essentials, that started to catch my eye and I started to think about it. I just started watching videos about the OSR, and that got me intrigued. And I would have to say that earlier this year, 2022, that I got involved. I went to my local game store and I saw some guys playing some Old School Essentials. And I'm like, man, I approve of that. That's cool. People are playing Old School Essentials. But, I had no intention of joining and playing. But, I went on a future visit. They were still playing at a subsequent visit, and I got invited to play. And so I jumped in, did the old 3D6 down the line, and I rolled up a magic user. Never played a magic user before. But let me tell you, I had a blast playing that magic user in my one random spell. It was, I want to say, Hold Portal. I just had a great time with my 3 hit points, hoping not to get hit and die, looking for every opportunity to get new spells in my spell book. I felt like the DM in that game was just a little bit too stingy for my taste, but whatever. It just brought back a sense of wonder. That group folded and reorganized, and I was left on the outside looking in. I still really appreciated that time finally. And now I look back on that time where I just kind of turned my nose up at the first edition players, and I just shake my head at my old self. I didn't have to do that or feel that way. I kind of wish I could go back in time and tell those guys how awesome it was for them to stick with a game that they love instead of just kind of moving forward with whatever the corporate mastermind owner of D&D was putting out. That is my OSR story in a sense. So now let's talk about the reasons why I have returned to OSR style gaming. As I've gotten older, I realized just how great the old school style games are. So that's my first reason, I guess, why I returned to the OSR, because I could really appreciate the beauty of them. There is a simplicity in the rules, so much so that the philosophy was that, hey, if it's not here, make it up. And there was a lot to make up. But at the same time, there was actually a skeleton there that could help you guide in your improvisation and house ruling, in my opinion. I noticed this as I was running my Sword and Sorcery game, which started as a 5th edition D&D game, but I quickly pivoted to an old school game. And I realized, man, this whole 2d6 system where you're rolling 2d6 and adding a modifier, and then looking at the monster reaction table. But the monster reaction table was similar to the NPC reaction table, which was similar to the Howling reaction table. And I realized there was something there I could just use in social situations whenever I wanted the dice to resolve things. So that was great. Also, there was a challenge there for players that forces them to be creative. As I was running my old school game, I realized that the players that I had, they really leaned into that because both of them came from a older style game. Both of them just had the mindset of just being creative, and old school style games sing with that because since there are fewer rules to get in the way and rely more on rulings, it really leaves a lot of space for players to get creative. I'm not saying that you can't do that in modern D&D. You can, but the truth is there are a lot more rules there. And so what the temptation could be, or at least my temptation was, to just go find the rule for that, even though I should have felt empowered to just make it up and look it up later. It just felt very wrong to me when I just knew there was a rule to cover the situation. So I went back to playing an old school style game with my sword and sorcery game, and we just had an absolute blast in my mini campaign with that because of the rulings not rules elegance of the old school system. Another reason why I went back to old school games was just how quick the combat was. Even running a combat in 5th edition with 2 players, it still took a while. 30, 45 minutes for a 2-player party? It just seems a little excessive. I think a combat should go like half an hour. When I went back to playing old school style, that's how it was with my group. Also, I played in an old school game at my local game store for a little bit before the group just got too big and it disbanded. Even in that party, which sometimes there were 8 players and like 12 characters, combat still moved really quickly just because, number one, you didn't have that many options, and number two, there were just fewer rules to get in the way. That really spoiled me on combat and simplicity and how long or short it could take. The turns just went really quickly. And so that's something that I love about old school style gaming. When I talk about old school style gaming, I'm talking primarily, your D&D type games here. Another reason why I went back to old school games, quite frankly, because of nostalgia. As a 13-year-old, I didn't truly appreciate the game, but this game gave me a sense of wonder. And just going back to old school style games, be it OSC, Adventurer Conqueror King, Swords and Wizardry, Castles and Crusades, or whatever, it just reinstilled that sense of wonder in me. And that's something I could truly appreciate. The thing is that, you never want to lose the magic in your hobbies, right? If you're going about a hobby is supposed to be something that's relaxing, something that's reinvigorating, and so on and so forth. And not that I was not excited about my hobby over the past several years, but after running 5th edition since it came out in 2014, even with the other games that I ran on the side, I think I did lose that sense of wonder. At least a little bit. And going back to these old school games, it really brought that back for me and just brought some fond memories back of hanging out with my friends and playing a game, playing a solo game, getting charmed by Bargle, losing the cleric, all of that fun stuff. My old 2nd edition game that I ran, Forgotten Realms, just my college days. All that stuff was just a fun time. And going back to these old school games really brought that back. Now, that's something that is personal to me, maybe a little bit idiosyncratic, but that's what these games bring for me, and that's why I'm back at it.